All right, it is 6:34 and we are calling the Judiciary Public, can't talk today. Judiciary Personnel and Licensing Committee to order. We have just two items on the agenda today. And first, we have the item where we are exploring the drafting of a charter ordinance that reinstates the requirement that the village president's appointments to the Plan Commission be subjected to village board approval. Manager Ewald.
Thank you. I won't bore you by going through the memo again, but just reference you to our last point of communication with regards to this matter, which occurred on October 17th of 2022. The JP&L committee briefly discussed this topic. Of the two members that were present, neither expressed interest in removing the village president's ability to make appointments. However, one member was absent and the group deferred action until the matter on what was going to be November 7th, but that got replaced by a DOT presentation. So that the full committee could be present to offer a recommendation. In brief, I provided some information regarding charter ordinances at the request of the village board. And then, as you'll recall, Attorney Nathan Bayer had provided a recommendation on perhaps how the group would proceed if they did want to modify the ordinance. So at this time, I'm here to listen to your discussion and take any recommendation that this committee will have.
So I'm happy to go first and just kind of recap my position on this. Is I'm generally opposed to this. And the reason being is I have an opposition to when we separate the powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch of a government from our level all the way up to the federal government. I believe that the person who makes the appointments should be also hold the power of seating those appointments, because when the legislature has the assigned job of advising and consenting, as is the language in the Constitution, what ends up happening is it doesn't act as a check on power. It acts as a transfer on power, and the power being the ability to seat any appointee. And it transfers that power to the legislative branch. This has been demonstrated very clearly with the United States Senate and how they've rejected seating Supreme Court appointees. More recently, it was represented in the Wisconsin State Senate in their refusal to seat a member of the DNR board, and that DNR board member's refusal to step down despite the executive branch, the governor, making a new appointment to that seat. And the power of the legislature to do that was upheld by the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court here. And so I'm generally opposed to that. I think it's one of those things that we hear about it in the Constitution. So we think, oh, great, it's a check on power, but that's not really how it acts in practice. It's a transfer of power. So in absence of a proper check on power, I think it should remain in the hands of the executive branch, who has the job of making the appointments in the first place, because that person is elected based on that job. And that's where the check in power comes in.
I think, Trustee Lynn makes a really compelling case. I kind of sit on the fence on this one a little bit, but I do lean towards agreeing with Trustee Lynn on this. I would be interested in hearing your what your position is, though, Melissa.
Thanks. I appreciate everything that Trustee Lynn said, and it was very well stated. Where I fall on this particular issue in Shorewood is that I think that it has been the intent of the people of Shorewood to have this legislative check. The reason we repealed an ordinance on it, it was because it was in conflict with provision in state law. But to my understanding, this is the way that the village operated for years and years and years. There was something in our code, and it seems like this is the way Shorewood has wanted this power to be utilized. And I am very inclined to return to that, because it seems that it has been the intent of folks in the village, and I'm comfortable with that with that check. I think that, you know, in some sense, you know, I could go either way. I think that we are very fortunate that we have, you know, wonderful leadership in the village. We have a great president, we have great staff, we have great trustees. I'm biased, but I think we do a pretty good job here. You know, I think, like I said, this is the way that the village operated for a long time. I think it was the intent of the people of Shorewood to have this process happen this way, to have more transparency, have more accountability, especially on something so significant. And as we look to the ways that the village is growing and changing, and some of the, you know, contentious fights there have been and robust discussions there have been around decisions coming out of the Plan Commission. I think that more transparency and more accountability all around isn't going to hurt anything. So I am inclined to support this and, you know, move it to the full board for conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I would like to see it move to the full board for a full conversation. Again, I kind of sit on both sides, so I'd love to see the full board discuss this. You know, but I also do agree with you. I've seen, you know, there have been some, like right now, we're in such a good state, I think, with this board and the leadership. You're right on that. And I've seen times where it hasn't been on point. You know, there's been issues. So I've seen both sides, and when it's the other side, it can be really harmful to the community. So with that in mind, I do believe that you know, this should be a bigger discussion, and you know, I'm kind of right in the middle of it. So
Right.
I'd love to hear kind of what the full board has to say about it, and after that, I would be making my decision. But I would decide. I would like to see the full board make this have this conversation.
Very reasonable. Yeah.
Okay.
Do we need a motion?
Yeah, is anyone ready to make a motion? Let's see. Oh, okay.
Well, you have my.
Yes. Yeah, I'll give it back to you. I'll take an effort here. I move to advance to the full board for discussion and a vote the drafting of a charter ordinance that reinstates the requirements that the village president's appointment to the Plan Commission be subject to village board approval. Okay.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Okay. Passes 2-1.
Even though, can I follow up on that? Just a question. And is that still open for discussion? So the president would be still appointing somebody, and the board would then be approving that appointee. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, that this doesn't take any power away from the president. This just has the component of.
Right. So other committees,
Approval.
we look over, at JPNL, we'll look over applications and make that recommendation through JPNL, then it would go to full board. In this case, the president would be recommending a certain appointee, and then the full board would be voting on that appointee. Is that the idea?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Okay. So moving on to item 2 on our agenda, which is a discussion on a code of ethics. Also, Manager Ewald.
So in preparation for this topic, we compiled a number of different examples of codes of conduct or code of ethics from other community. The content ranges significantly from statements of acceptable behavior and self-regulated requirements to ordinances and forms to collect economic interest statements and ethics committees. So there wasn't direction provided in how you wanted to explore this topic. If it were, I would have narrowed this field for you. So in part tonight is an opportunity for us to talk about the opportunity you've had to review this information, and for the committee to provide some direction on next steps. So within your packet, we listed a number of different examples, and it is really up to the committee in terms of the review and discussion on that this evening that will dictate how we proceed.
Fantastic. Thank you. Trustees on the committee, anything you want to
Yeah,
say?
so my name here is attached to it, so I guess I'll go first, in the discussion here. I think it was Kathy. I don't know if this is something that we discussed at one point. I forget, who was around here, but who was part of this discussion. But I think this is kind of, very similar to the last conversation where, in the current state, we have a really great makeup of leadership in the community here from on the board, the staff, et cetera, the president. But in the past, it hasn't always been like that. There's been a lot of divisiveness and, and I think this concept was to figure that out and to figure out, is there something more that we can do to make sure that people aren't abusing their powers or abusing their powers, whether it be in person or online. Looking through all of these recommendations, I feel like, currently the staff, has a lot on their plate. And I feel like this is a kind of a big endeavor to go down. And at the same time, I feel like if there's nothing that we can actually do about these issues, I think the only way to remove somebody is recall. I'd love to explore what would happen if, somebody, went against one of these codes of conduct, can they be reprimanded, and I think if there are ways to do that, then I'd be interested in looking at these codes, but without that, I'm not, I don't think it's necessary.
I brought this article with me because I thought it was a great summary. I apologize because I was reading it over the weekend. But it came out actually within the municipality magazine in October. And I will forward this to you so that you can review it later. But if Kathy, you have the page, it's number 20 or page 27. They state what laws govern public officials and ethical matters. And what I thought it did was provide just a really brief summary that answer. Oh, good. We all have it in front of us. That answers your question, which are what rules are out there already and what remedies could be sought. Not necessarily for discussion this evening, unless you guys want to go through it, but maybe take an opportunity to review that. And it just sparked my memory with
That's fantastic.
your inquiry about.
I think that's kind of where my where I go on this topic is if we're going to go through this process, there should be some sort of outcome to it. So that's kind of where I stand. I think that, I appreciate there's a lot of great work in here and a lot of good ideas, but at this, I also think that with the amount of work the staff currently has, this is one of those big endeavors that, I'm not sure we need to go down at the moment, or at least in such detail as some of these codes of conduct, but that's my opinion. So.
Trustee Lynn, anything you wanted to add?
I mean, I like the idea of having a code of conduct and outlining these kinds of things. But as is very clear from the examples, there's a million directions that can take. Some of these, I was looking at them like they don't seem to have any impact whatsoever. Like Arthur was saying, they don't have any. There's no teeth to them. But how far do we want to go down this road? I mean, do we really want a code of conduct like this where we outline every possible thing? I mean, can we think of every possible problem that could come up? Probably not. So I mean, I like the idea of it, but I guess I'm just not 100% sure where to begin, other than just copying in other municipalities.
That's, from my perspective, I think, and was great that and timely that it was in the municipality and that Manager Ewald pointed it out for us that there are already, guidelines and laws at the state level that govern the conduct of elected officials, which includes local elected officials. I think that what we're ultimately talking about here has been in the past, maybe a lack of, civility and respect for others. And, it makes me, it gives me pause to try to legislate that issue, just like, when Director Butchlick will say, like, we can't engineer our way out of every problem in public works. Like, we can't legislate ourselves out of every problem either. And I think that it would be very difficult to, codify some of this. And I have a lot of concerns. I know, on the one hand, saying, like Trustee Ursing said, there's a concern that if somebody was doing something wrong about, is there a method for accountability? I do think there are methods for accountability that exist already. And I worry that, if there are bad actors, they could weaponize that. And I would hate to see us get to that point where there's not just accusations, but, these like complaints being filed or, really, nasty behavior, because if that's how somebody is going to act, I don't think we could make enough rules to make people treat each other with respect, unfortunately. So that's the concern I have. I would be supportive, however, of at some point down the road, if staff is going to be looking at our employee handbook as a whole, we could update the employee handbook, and I would be very comfortable with that. But, I know our staff has a lot on their plates already. I don't know, how high on the priority list that is at the moment, how many other updates there might be that are needed. But I would be supportive of, kind of re-examining the code of conduct / kind of expectations that are in the employee handbook already.
Does that exist right now in a current employee handbook, a code of conduct for your employees?
We have a personnel manual. And I guess that's one of the distinction points. While technically you are considered, employees of the village, some of these that we provided to you were primarily driven towards elected officials. Some were primarily driven towards staff. Some were derived towards both. So not understanding what objective the group was looking to cover, it was hard for me to kind of pull out what I didn't know what we were looking for right at that point. If I knew what the goal was, then we could take a look at that. Trustee Baldoff, I do recognize we have a hand raised. So when and how you should take public comment.
We can take comment now.
Is that me?
Yes, it is.
This is Jeff Davidian. I've listened to discussions about having an ethics committee for a couple of years now. You never seem to want it. Everybody's for it. Everybody wants to have some kind of structure, some kind of to look like you're for an ethics code without actually doing it. We've just gone through a period with the federal government where they just disregarded all of the ethical rules. You don't have time, the staff doesn't have time to come up with an ethics code. You have time to put a brief every week about, in the village manager's memo about the farmer's market. You have time to do all these other things that have no consequence. But when it comes to monitoring the conduct of public officials, it's just too much. You want to copy other people. You want to copy all the other North Shore communities about everything else. You say, well, let's see what the other North Shore communities are doing. But this one, you don't want to copy what the other ones do. What's wrong with having a code of conduct and a board that will enforce it? When you had one before for 2 weeks, the village president, who was not in office at the time, went and filed a complaint against trustee with David, and you didn't have any trouble doing that. So I don't know why. Oh, yes, I do. Nobody wants to be regulated. Nobody wants to have rules that they want to live by. But you can set it up for beyond yourselves to where other trustees and other times will have a structure to work in. It's not as though this village has been without any kind of ethical problems. We have had plenty of them. We've had money diverted to the library. There have been all kinds of things. So this is not high school. This is the government. And I'd ask you to do your job and stop saying you don't have time. You take all this time to say you don't have time. Why don't you just do it? That's what we man up. Thank you.
Thank you. That was not entirely helpful for me to make a decision, but I appreciate you spending that time sharing your
Mhm.
thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I will say, however, sorry, I just want to briefly address one thing at the end, that I did not particularly appreciate the suggestion that we man up. So I would prefer in the future to not hear that kind of conversation. It's very demeaning to women.
I agree.
Trustee Stokebrand.
Agreed.
Thank you. I concur. This is an important issue because I think we've talked about how there have been issues before at the village board level. And I think a lot of it traces back to not having a clear, I wouldn't call it a code of conduct because I think that ethics is just a more fitting word. I don't think we can legislate conduct really. I do think there are parameters you can say. I mean, I have personally been offended by words said to me by another trustee. And I thought, well, what do I do with this? Where do I go with it? And it was harassment about an intimate part of my body. And I thought, this is so inexcusable. And it was an event that we were all attending as a group. And at the end of the day, I decided to keep it to myself and try to think of a way to deal with such a situation. And that's why I think a code of ethics would be a good idea. I think that we seem to have an issue even acknowledging conflict of interest on this board. And it's because of the need for integrity in local government that I think a basic code of ethics would not be that difficult to write. I would be happy to be involved. I'm not on this committee, but maybe, we could do it as a cow. I think it'd be easy to come up with 4 or 5 categories that we think are important. I thought the Mankato piece was especially good, and I appreciate the work of staff to bring all these different options before us. It gives us a lot to work off of. This doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be, I guess it depends on your perspective, but I think that it doesn't hurt to set a baseline for when you have a donation, a gift from someone, and you don't disclose it and you don't recuse yourself from voting. I think it's important for the public to know, again, because it's about public integrity and local government, maintain the public's trust and confidence in the process. And so I would hope we move forward in some sort. Obviously, it's not deadline sensitive, but I believe Attorney Bayer mentioned when we talked about this before, you don't want to be sitting in a situation when you need a code of ethics and you don't have one. That's when you have a problem. You want to have one before the situation comes up so you have something to apply. Otherwise, you're left with. So I would encourage us to move forward with the code of ethics at some point. And if the most egregious, if the most serious claim is that someone is censured by the body, I think that has some value.
I think that, personally, it can be a dangerous slope. For example, you live on Lake Drive. You talk to your residents at Lake Drive. I'm sure you have financial donors from Lake Drive. Now, when votes come up for Lake Drive, are you going to recuse yourself from all of those votes?
If I had a financial interest in the outcome, I would.
Okay. Well, that's great to know. I'm not sure your example was really, I don't think there was that didn't occur in your example. Because I know the example you're talking about, so I don't think there was any financial situation on the other side. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, and I think conspiracy theories run this village, and that can be a dangerous path to go down. So to have, and I'm like I said earlier, I'm for if we can create teeth to this. Like, I've witnessed our past village president, intoxicated on a Zoom. What do you do about that? Nothing. The answer was nothing. The answer was you have to recall. And unless we can figure out other paths, and I'm very sorry for the situation that you went through, that is unacceptable. And I know there's been other situations that are very unacceptable. But in the long run, what do we do? And if you have this issue, do you come to the village board with it? And do you tell the whole village board, this is what happened at this event? I would like to censure this trustee. It's your word versus their word at that point, and it's hard to make those determinations without clear evidence. And I know it's a terrible thing that happened, but how do we make those determinations and then censure somebody? There's always recall, and that I think when looking into the past of what happened with our village president, that was the only way to get her out was to recall. So I don't know of other ways that we can go about this. And if there are, I'm definitely open to listening to it, because I don't want to go through what we went through back, several years ago.
She didn't recall. She did not seek reelection.
No, the only way to get rid of her would have been recall. But she was in no mental capacity to be an elected official here in Shorewood.
So one thing I'd like to just bring up, and maybe this is something that we can save for, and we are coming up on time here as well, and we have another meeting after this. I don't know if it's something Attorney Bear can look into, but, I'm looking at the Mankato example that Trustee Stokebrand, flagged as being one of interest. And, again, I guess my point with this has been, not that I'm against ethics and high standards, because I'm certainly not, but all the things that are in this particular one that I'm looking at, these are all things that exist in state law already. That you have to abide by the law, not being able to receive gifts. There are a few that aren't, necessarily codified in state law about, not testifying in their capacity as a council member. But, largely most of these provisions are already codified in state law. And would it be helpful if Attorney Bear could share with us what is the recourse people would have under existing state law if, trustees or, any other leader are not following those laws? Because if that already exists, perhaps there's just an opportunity to let people know, what's the recourse there. So that's something I'm curious about. And can we pursue that? Would others be open to hearing what exists already in terms of the recourse that's available to people?
I think that sounds like a good direction to me.
I would also question, is there any reason we couldn't vote to censure someone as it stands right now? As the board, do we not have that right to say that we could put a motion forward to censure that another individual on the board?
I've never been through this process, but so we should confirm with Attorney Bear, but my understanding is yes. However, just to follow up on your suggestion, I think a starting point for a next discussion could be just to start with the education of what this fact encompasses,
agree.
and perhaps have Attorney Bear there so that we can look at any other or ask those questions, right? And then perhaps take a next step.
I'm comfortable with that.
Same, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Davidian does have his hand raised. I don't know if this
Not
is over
interested.
okay.
Do we have a motion to it?
Just a motion to adjourn. If the
Motion to
group is
adjourn?
Amenable to how we're going to proceed. Okay.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Adjourned at 7:03. Are we in here?
You're in here for Public Works.
Okay.
Leanne, if you want to come up here and sit, you're welcome to.
Is Rebecca coming back here, or is she's just over there? Okay. Fantastic. So we're ready to start Public Works. Close them all. All right. Like to convene the Public Works Board, 7:04. Tonight, we have one agenda item. That item is the 2024 Downer Avenue Reconstruction GI Enhancements Review, Southeast Area Combined Sewer Improvements Project, Phase 2. And we have Director Leanne Bushlick here to present. Take it away, Leanne.
Okay. At our last meeting, the committee reviewed a number of the GI options that were identified by the Sigma Group, who was a sub-consultant to the engineering consultant for the Southeast Area Combined Sewer Improvements, Strand Associates. And after that review, you asked for some additional information on 3 different items. One was a proposed biofiltration or bioswale at the east toe of the Menlo Boulevard. Specifically, you asked about options to downsize that structure. And then we also talked about incorporating GI bump outs at the intersections of Oakland and Menlo. So after further review of the biofiltration structure on the Menlo Boulevard, the designer actually did not recommend downsizing because the majority of the water that structure was used to filter was actually piped there through an underground system. And they said, really, in order to downsize that, you're taking away most of that piping structure, and you're essentially just surface draining the surrounding pavement, and said, really, if that is the other, they wouldn't recommend that option. So in essence, they suggest you either leave it the size that it is conceptually designed or remove it altogether. It loses a significant amount of effectiveness if you start playing with its footprint. So that certainly is an option. Then the consultant also identified specific locations for those biofiltration basins at the intersections mentioned. Said that at the Menlo intersection, the best design solution from an engineering standpoint and water capture standpoint was to install those bump outs on the north side of that intersection. And then at the Shorewood intersection, they thought that those adding bump outs in that area, and I use quotes, great opportunity, they said, because that would capture a significant amount of drainage, and that those would be best located on the south side of that intersection.
Thank you. Trustees, do you have, Trustee Baldoff, I don't think you were present for the last conversation we had about this. I know that Trustee Lynn and I made some recommendations to scale down the GI, and that's not something we typically would be in favor of, but a lot of it was I hate to use the word superficial, but a lot of it was just kind of for show, because this is all going into the combined sewer system, correct?
We like to call it an educational opportunity.
Sorry, very well said. So I think we were looking at the price tag and thought, that we could pare down what the plan was. So this is kind of coming back. I wish there was the graphic of the whole street of all the different bump outs we said. Do you know that, from the last time we discussed this, if those other bump outs have been kind of removed or pared down? I know there was a couple up there that were.
So my understanding of the direction you gave was that we would only be looking at 2 intersections for bump outs.
Okay, so
So
that's moving
Menlo and
forward.
Shorewood, and moving forward, I asked the designer to evaluate those intersections because we talked about a pair of bump outs at each rather than a bump out at each corner.
Yep.
And so they said the north side of the Menlo Downer intersection and the south side of the Shorewood Downer intersection. So 2 pair.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. Trustee Baldoff, do you have any questions about this topic?
No, I don't think I do. Yeah, no, I don't.
Trustee Lynn?
I do. So I spoke to some residents on Menlo about the option of the biofiltration basin in the boulevard. And there was a strong opposition to that. And I think not in a negative way or anything like that. I think it's the general idea is great. Everybody was who I spoke to, you know, obviously a very limited sample size, but was all for the bump outs, the little ones already proposed things like that, but the big one that cut into Menlo, you know, it just takes away a lot of green space, and you know, I hate to say superficial, but it's already grass. It's already a green space there, and they have some flowers and some trees planted there, and there's a tree that's really close to where they would, you know, put it on the boulevard, which makes me a little nervous that they might end up needing to cut down a tree, which I wouldn't want to do. So I'm opposed to the Menlo Basin and in favor of the bump outs.
Just to dig deeper on that one, did those residents that you talked to, do they use this space? Do they just like it as it is current green space? Is it something that is a usable space?
It's just a highly used space.
Mhm.
And that's really the key. And I even said, you know, now if we talked about it, if it's maybe designed a little differently where it might guarantee keeping your basement dry. A friend of mine said he'd rather have a wet basement than lose the park across the street. So, you know,
It's very used.
it's very nice. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a really nice space. And as much as I like the green infrastructure, especially since this is going into the combined sewer, and especially considering the enormous cost of it compared to the other ones, and the fact that it's taking something away from residents that they already have, I'm just not okay with proceeding with that one. But the other bump outs I like.
And I think that's really important. I appreciate you reaching out to, you know, it's something, you know, I kind of forget to do sometimes, that we should just go to the residents and talk to them and see what they want, because, you know, we're trying to do something good and trying to do something good,
Right.
the greater good for the village, but yet we're taking away something from the neighborhood, those residents. And I would not be okay with that. So I appreciate your conversations with those
Absolutely.
residents. And I would have to agree with you then. You know, I would say, like, you know, we love our bioswales here, but and we love every chance we can get for an educational opportunity. I think we'd love to take it, but I think in this case, you know, if it's a highly used, high traffic sort of green space, then I'd be in favor of keeping it the way it is.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think we kind of have a little motion option here. Do I need to specifically say no to the Menlo one, or can I just in the motion just do the two that we want?
I would just leave it out because there are other items that were identified in the analysis, and
Sure.
we're not specifically mentioning those because you had already
Push those.
eliminated those.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I will go ahead and make the motion here. I move that the Public Works Committee recommend the following green infrastructure enhancements to be included in the 2024 Phase 2 Southeast Area Combined Sewer Improvements Project. The biofiltration bump outs on the north side of the intersection of North Downer Avenue and East Menlo Boulevard. The biofiltration bump outs on the south side of the intersection of North Downer Avenue and East Shorewood Boulevard.
A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. There you have it. That's always a hard one. You know, I mean, I think we love our green infrastructure here, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And in this case, it doesn't make sense. So thank you so much, Leanne, for all your work on this.
Yeah, thank
Sure.
you very much.
Pending schedule, I would assume that we would have this at your first December board meeting for full board action, so it can be returned to the designer.
Ah, fantastic.
Great.
Sounds great. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned at
right.
7:14. Got 16 minutes to spare.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting of the village board to order this evening at 7:35. All trustees are present and accounted for. Is this meeting been publicly noticed?
The meeting has been properly noticed and posted according to law.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for their time, talent, and patience in advance, and may all beings be safe and may all beings be at ease. With that, I'd like to move on to item 4, special order of business. 4A, consider Lake Drive's State Highway 32 typical road section. As you will recall at our November 7th board meeting, the DOT team was here asking us to consider 4 items on a condensed timeline due to trying to lock in construction for 2025, right? At that time, we gave direction on 3 of those items. The 4th, relating to lane configuration, was deferred so that more review can be done internally by staff and also by the Parks and Open Spaces Committee. I did attend the Parks meeting and was really impressed by the amount of time that staff and the committee took in reviewing the alternatives and having a very thoughtful discussion. There's been a lot of engagement on this. I want to say thank you to the community for that. And it's almost like Shorewood spontaneously facilitated a public information campaign and generated a ton of data for DOT to consider. And hopefully they will do so in the future. So at this time, I'm going to ask that Village Manager Ewald summarize the internal review findings, which are in our packet this evening. There's a memo that summarizes activity to date, but then what occurred between last meeting and this meeting in terms of data to review. And so I will hand it over to Village Manager Ewald at this time.
Thank you. Staff conducted a service impact regarding the feasible alternatives. The group was unanimous in that they jointly recommend the endorsement of the buffered 5-foot bike lane with the parking at curb alternative for the reasons noted in the memo, which actually cover a span of 2 pages. I'm happy to go through each of those with this group, but would you desire to go through them one by one, or?
I see.
I think, this topic could be helpful to inform some people. I mean, I don't know if we can do a sort of an abridged version, but I think all the information tonight would be helpful to make this decision.
Sure. Then let's start on page 4. Pardon me, page 3.
Of the memo.
So page 3 of the memo, halfway down, we talk about the 4 alternatives that were discussed at our meeting on November 7th. The first alternative, which was the 5-foot buffered bike lane options with construction and maintenance consideration. We noted that this option reduces the travel lanes to 10 feet to provide for buffered bike lanes. A 3-foot area of high visibility pavement marking creates the buffer lane. The additional initial construction cost to include buffer pavement configuration is estimated at approximately $30,000. All the proposed pavement markings are epoxy and require remarking 3 to 5 years, every 3 to 5 years. Pavement marking costs, as you know, are an operational budget consideration. The 6-foot bike lane option maintains a 12-foot travel lane. This alternative has 6-foot bike lanes with no pavement marking buffer. As such, it's the least costly alternative to both build and maintain. It should be noted that the alternatives, which include the northbound bike lane at the curb, will require additional evaluation and special approval from WISDOT. as the configuration is not considered to be a standard right now in the state of Wisconsin. The evaluation process would add significant hours on behalf of WISDOT. And should you desire to proceed, staff asks that the board proceed with the request only to evaluate it if the bike lane at curb options are likely candidates for consideration as advised by WISDOT. In addition to that, Public Works suggests that the protected bike lane options may require, again, pavement marking and parking lanes to be clearly delineated. For example, with the legal parking areas to reduce driveway and crosswalk encroachment from parked vehicles. One of the discussions that we've frequently had on Lake Drive over the last few years and continue to have is people parking inappropriately on the street, blocking current driveways that are there. And prohibiting parking with no parking signs, which sometimes are observed, other times are not observed, in front of homes, at this time on both sides of the street, in the future, which would only be on the east side of the street. So one of the things that's unique about this roadway section and an exercise that we have asked the DOT to take a look at is specifically how many parking stalls are going to be on the east side of the road, and specifically where are you going to provide those parking stalls, and recognizing that our largest enforcement issue really on Lake Drive during the summer has been active enforcement of people parking where there is either no parking or encroaching on driveway entrances, or, you know, blocking an entrance because a car is there. We can't notify, we don't know. We know who the owner of the vehicle is. We can't find that owner, someone trying to get in and out of their driveway. And how to depict that on the roadway during multiple conditions. It's almost as if you would need to demarc a parking stall with both front and back end in order to achieve that. But going through that exercise all the way down the east side of the road, so you physically see where parking would be prohibited or not. Because one of the things that came up on the DOT end in conjunction with the discussion is, you know, we acknowledge and recognize that parking is going to be eliminated on the west side of the road. So during those periods of time, if there looks like there's an available spot, there may be so. And given that distance between curb and then the parked vehicle, which may in some cases look like a vehicle on an island, because in between many of our driveways, there's capacity to only hold one vehicle, if that, based upon whatever standard the DOT comes up with. Our village engineer then also took a look at this documentation and provided some comments. He as well noted that the buffered lanes will require additional pavement markings every 3 to 5 years. He notes as well, similar to DOT, parking protected bike lanes will result in a loss of parking. Additional pavement markings will be necessary to delineate those stalls. Bike lanes at the curb will reduce the width of the storm inlets and will reduce the bike lane width to approximately 3 feet at the inlets. During the fall and winter, the width of the lane will likely be reduced by leaf piles and snow. The 10-foot driving lane and 8-foot parking lane is relatively narrow. Typical parking stalls in a parking lot are 9 feet wide, to provide some perspective for the group's consideration. Then moving on, there's been discussion with regards to what Milwaukee desires to propose as their typical section. They have expressed a typical section that does have a bike lane on both sides of the roadway, on the east side of the road against the curb. Milwaukee's intention is also to provide a curb between the bike lane and the parking lane, as they have an additional foot in the roadway width in comparison to Shorewood. So one of the things that you've heard us talk about before is that not every roadway segment between all of our communities are the same. That foot, while it seems minimal, in some cases to our group, is a big consideration in the design process. Also, as a reminder, the board has approved bump outs at Edgewood and Kensington that will provide an opportunity for a transitional pavement marking at the boundaries between Milwaukee and Whitefish Bay. Between our last meeting, we also convened with the public and parks and, pardon me, we changed this committee's name 3 times since I've been here, so I'm going to get it right this time. Park and Public Spaces Committee. That meeting was held on Tuesday, November 15th. The majority of the members favored the 5-foot buffered bike lane with the bike lane at curb option. The committee members also expressed the preference that Milwaukee and Shorewood typical sections be coordinated. And feedback from the 7 residents in attendance was largely in support of the options with the protected bike lane. Members of the committee also acknowledged that the committee is not responsible for considering all fiscal and operational impacts that may occur because of recommending the option. Members viewed their role as advocates and desired to be progressive with the improvements explored. It was further acknowledged that any alternatives would be a significant improvement as there is no designated bike lanes on Lake Drive at this time. Should the 5-foot buffered bike lane at curb option not be selected, members of the committee voiced second preference for the 5-foot buffered bike lane parking at curb option. Included within your packet that was released last Thursday, we had sent a letter to residents on Lake Drive to be assured that they knew of the options being proposed and could advise us of any of their comments, as well as enlisting comments from the entire community by the village manager's memo and updates on the Park and Public Spaces Committee. Those comments that were received up until I believe noon on Thursday have been included in your packet. Those that have come in after that time have been compiled before this meeting this evening and provided to you or forwarded by email earlier today. Those will be compiled and also placed with the packet and re-uploaded following this meeting tonight. In going through, there is a portion of this memo where I sat back and provided a village manager's comment. There are a lot of different stakeholders that are a part of putting together this roadway design. And I think it's been a really phenomenal process to watch the growth of Lake Drive and it change ever since being here in Shorewood. We've gone through some really significant changes going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And now having the opportunity, because WISDOT is going to be going to reconstruct the roadway and put it back again for us. And for us, in large part, many people will see the above ground improvements. We're going to be investing millions underground in order to make that some more conducive environment. So my mindset on all of these is the 30,000-foot view of Shorewood and what's going on in terms of competing priorities and needs and attentions at the time that it has. I can't go forward in the discussion without putting on the business hat, and that's really all that it is that I'm doing right now. To take a look at where we're at and some of the scope and planning and other activities occurring in the village at this time. In the next 4 years, our Public Works Department will take on the largest infrastructure projects that have ever taken place in the village's history in 23 and 24, which will then be followed by Lake Drive underground sewer water pavement replacement, and then followed the next year by North Oakland Avenue. We've never completed projects in this level, in this magnitude before, but they're all welcomed improvements and ones that you've been fiscally and project management guiding. This is coupled with a review that we're currently undertaking of a dilapidated public works facility that decreases our operational functionality of the department. Moving forward with an alternative, and this is what has been most striking to me, that the DOT does not have a standard for. There is no standard in the state of Wisconsin for option 4, which is parking, bike lane next to the curb. It's not tested in a suburban environment with multiple driveway road cuts and may cause additional man hours, cost, and frustration during a time that, given the other projects we have here, isn't prudent. While I appreciate the department's reliance on wanting to ask our opinion, I would stand first to ask the department what standard that they would apply to all of Lake Drive. And that means not just Shorewood, not just Milwaukee, but Lake Drive in general. It's my understanding that it typically takes 2 years for a standard to be vetted through WISDOT in order to be developed, taking into account a thorough understanding of everything that has been impacted. I think in the conversations that I've heard in the last several weeks, there's been a valiant cry from the community to continue to explore these types of protected bikes paths in other communities. I think when there's a viable alternative that meets the goals of pedestrian and cycling safety on the table, we have one that can meet that need in option 3. When a standard's provided and thought through, more importantly, on the timetable that they have us to reconstruct this road in a guaranteed time rate of 2025, that the board could consider a standard in the future. No different than we've considered a new standard and how we decrease this roadway from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. But in front of me, I don't have a standard. And we're being asked to provide our preference, not a guarantee, within a month timeframe in order to hit the next public informational meeting. For the audience, if you're not aware, the DOT did ask us to accelerate this project from 2026 to 2025 in order for the village to be able to lock this in to a confirmed construction date of 2025. That's critical to our schedule because we only have 1 year of play of which to reconstruct, or pardon me, pavement replacement of North Oakland Avenue. This board specifically set out to design that project originally planned for North Oakland in 2025 to allow our business improvement district a full year to understand what that construction schedule will be like and to plan for it accordingly. This changes it out. The funds for North Oakland are limited. They need to be expended from tax increment district number 5, which is scheduled, barring pending lawsuit, to close in a timely basis. So the board has chosen, which I think they would agree would be an unpopular decision, to accelerate the project so that we could get a guaranteed timeline of construction with WISDOT in 2025. I'm boring to someone on that. Apologies. I've talked a lot, but they're 6 or 7 pages within the scope of this memo. So I can address any questions that you have at this point in time. We have Director Butchlick representing Public Works with us in attendance, as I believe Director Grubentrag from Planning and Development. We're here to address technical matters related to the project and look forward to hearing your resolution this evening.
Thank you very much. So we have a couple of options. So just I want to talk about how to take this item because there are a lot of people here that probably want to speak. And I also want to hear from the trustees, obviously. I also want to put out there that, you know, we've talked and there is a level of frustration. You know, I do feel that it's unreasonable to consider an alternative when there's no state standard. So it seems backwards to me that we would say that we recommend something and then have them go study it. I would prefer personally that they study it and then let us know how it would be applied. And that would be for the length of Lake Drive and not just our jurisdiction, right? Or study it in the context of coordinating with Milwaukee at least, and then also giving recommendations for Whitefish Bay and Fox Point. So why should cyclists only have the advantage in Shorewood and Milwaukee, right? You know, so we do have the option of saying to DOT, go study this. You gave it to us as an alternative. Milwaukee's interested in it, study it, develop a standard, come back to us and we'll see. Because the other condition is that if there's no standard, it's also unlikely that it will be matched with funding from the federal level, in my opinion. Nobody can say that for sure. But since that's why they took away the parking in the first place, was to make room for bike lanes because of funding matches from the government. So, and we didn't want them to remove the parking. So we've done this. We've also gone down this road before where we've asked for something and we've asked for it over and over again, and we've polled the community and we haven't gotten it. And for residents that are just hearing that now that we lost the parking on the west side, I apologize for that. So anyway, I just want to let you know that we do have that option. And so if anybody else is feeling like I am and that there's not enough information and that we may need more leadership from DOT, we can make a motion to defer and direct them to do so, to evaluate that and come back to us at a later date. But at this time, I will open it up to trustees and you can ask questions. We can see what the temperature of the room is. We can hear from the public, but I just wanted to lay that out that at a high level, that's how I'm feeling. Trustee. Urtasun.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Manager Ewald. That was very well said. I appreciate your thoughts on this topic. Just a couple of technical questions. I know in our last meeting, I think we were going to check with DOT to see if we could get signage or what would happen under, like a major weather occurrence. Like, is there a way to make sure that there's no parking on that street so we can clean out the street? Because I think my biggest concern with the bike lane on the curb is the debris, the snow, the things that are going to get stuck in there. I think it's going to ultimately be unsafe for bikers in those kind of weather occurrences, which are going to happen here in the wintertime. And I'm not quite sure our DPW staff is going to be, is going to have the resources to take care of that right away. So have we communicated with DOT on if there would be signage that they could potentially put out that would say like no parking under certain conditions, so we can in fact plow that all in one swoop instead of trying to get like a little vehicle in there and plow that separately?
Director Bushlick can correct me if I'm wrong, but signage and restriction of parking would be a village responsibility.
Okay.
And
It'd be a
so
policy
signage that
change.
we would need to, different ordinances that you would adopt and then protocols.
Got you. So that would be the village would come up with that ordinance.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And have we consulted the Shorewood Police Department and Chief Worth about this?
Yes,
In your
Chief Worth
packet.
was also present at the Park and Public Spaces Committee. She stayed for that entire section. She had voiced, we also have Captain Robluski, who's on the call with us tonight, if you want additional comments from him as well. But I think in general, the tone was there was a concern regarding safety. When a vehicle is pulled over at the side of the road and officer in the road and how to maneuver with the vehicle. And then again, the concern of parking. Sometimes even with the signage that we do have, one of our gems is Atwater, and it attracts people from all over the region. So while we can have an educational campaign on how to train people on how to interact with this high seasonal draw area at the time, we've also seen instances with the same bike lanes at the curb that have not been observed. And then also the dynamic of at many times on Lake Drive, particularly going north, areas where we don't believe we can fit more than one vehicle parked between two properties. So the consistency and predictability for people to understand that it's just maybe a challenge from an enforcement standpoint.
And my last question is from a safety perspective, with the configuration of, let's say, option number 4, with that car parked in the parking lane, is there a safety concern for that driver getting out of the car and how close in proximity it could be to the cars traveling down, the street?
That was something that came up during the discussion at Parks and Public Spaces. Again, one of our highest draws being Atwater. Typically, when you see vehicles parked there, there's a number of people getting out of the vehicle, followed by wagon, beach blanket. There's a lot going on in that transition. But it all depends on people's behavior.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Other trustees, Trustee Stokebrand, you had a question?
Thank you. I'm sorry I was not able to attend the last Parks and Open Spaces meeting. I'm trying to figure out how, so like when the mail carrier comes to deliver my mail and the van is parked in front of my house, I live on the east side of Lake Drive. They're supposed to park in the parking lane, right? And so and like Amazon, UPS, the lawn services, if anybody is not parked in the parking lane, I mean, they already know this, right? Because I mean, I can see some people not, I've heard that it won't be enforced. And so it will just basically become a parking lane. And I wonder how that will work with the police department. I'm also wondering about our new leaf vacuums. So right now they kind of sit in a lane of traffic. And then the long hose goes out and vacuums up the leaves. So where would that vehicle be? Would it be in the parking lane? And you'd hope no one would be parking there, pick up the leaves in my parkway. I don't know how long is the piece? Is that possible?
With respect to leaves, when we are collecting from the east side, we would have to be in the bike lane to make that collection. We'd actually also have to be in the bike lane on the west side because the arm on the vac is not long enough to reach from the parking lane over the bike lane and to the parkway.
So our own vehicles will be in violation of the bike lane rule, just to be functional.
Okay.
Maybe it'll work better now.
Maybe. That is correct. So for servicing leaf collection, refuse collection and recycling collection, those service vehicles need to be at the curb.
So I will still put my garbage cart at the end of my driveway. And the garbage truck will come in the bike lane.
Correct.
And that's okay. I mean, we all have to think about that.
Right.
So if a bicycle is coming in the bike lane and the garbage truck is there, or the leaf collector, they're going to have to go out of the bike lane, whether it's protected or not. Right? We all have an understanding then about this. Thank you.
Other trustees?
I'll just kind of reiterate a couple of points I made last week. You know, I was very involved with the current design of Lake Drive. You know, I helped to draw that design and was involved with the implementation. At the time, when we asked Lake Drive if we could go, or asked the state if we could go from 4 lanes down to 2, they said yes, contingent on the fact that they were going to change it in 2025, no matter what we did. And that time is upon us now. So that's kind of how, you know, I got to this point. I think there's a lot to consider here. I think I'm in favor of the buffered bike lanes first and foremost. As I said last week or 2 weeks ago, rather, you know, I think there are pros and cons to both the protected and the unprotected bike lanes, along with as long as we go with the buffered bike lane option. I think the narrower drive lanes will slow traffic, which is really, I mean, that's really the problem on Lake Drive, as anybody who's ever been on Lake Drive in any capacity can say. It's people driving too fast is the worst part of Lake Drive. So I think that would help to slow traffic. And we know that it does. It's an engineering reality. Given Milwaukee's interest in pursuing the bike lane on the curb and the parking in the street, which they have had success with in downtown in recent years, I would be inclined to support that option, because I do think it is important to have consistency from Milwaukee all the way north. That being said, I'm in no way opposed to the other option that has, I believe it's option 3 we're referring it to as, which is the parking on the curb and the bike lane in the more traditional location. I think those are both good options. I think we have a tough decision to make, but that would be where I stand. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess somewhat related to Trustee Stokerbrand's concern, but more with foot traffic. My concern with the buffered 5-foot bike lane or 5 or 6 foot bike lane with bike lane at curb is just during peak bike season. There's also a lot of beach traffic, and having biked a lot in Chicago, Milwaukee, and other cities along beaches, I think that lane would be almost realistically wholly unusable in terms of people come. Things drop there, what have you, assuming that every person that's coming in to park, like I just do door swing, people parking closer than expected. I see a lot of bicyclists then not using that lane, and we just have a bigger problem. So for this, I think in the right place, a bike lane like that is the right thing. I just don't think that this is the place with the constraints and with the usage in that area.
Yes. Making eye contact, trustee Moore. No. All right. That is a good point. The advantages of protected bike lanes don't necessarily apply to public beaches that are with a very narrow park front. So are the trustees, is there an interest in making a motion at this time? Would you like to take public comment? The only reason I'm not trying to shut down public comment, but I also, if the board isn't interested in pursuing this evening, I don't want I want people to know what to expect. Yes.
I feel like if the residents came to speak, we should allow them to speak their mind
Okay.
on this topic.
Agreed.
Great. We'll take public comment at this time, and I would like people that have not spoken or submitted emails to speak first. Unless Chair Brooke. Sure. If you could,
Gotta go right up,
Yeah.
gotta go right up into the,
Yeah.
sorry.
Thank you.
My name is Gary Brunk. I'm the chair of the Parks and Public Spaces. I trip over that myself. I live in 1827 East Kenmore. So as Village Manager Evil said earlier, we had a long discussion, a vigorous discussion. I would say that the committee felt that the timing of this is unfortunate, and I think you've expressed it already. The fact that we were asked to come up with a recommendation for a topic that, to be perfectly clear, we did not discuss before that meeting, puts us in a very bad situation. Nevertheless, we had a good discussion. That discussion was followed up by a pretty vigorous conversation via email about a statement that I hope that I don't know whether you saw it or not, it wasn't in your packet. But basically, while on the one hand, we think option 3 is an okay option, we support option 4. And the reason we support option 4 is that we think that it's in line with best practices and with the research. It's comparable to what bike-friendly communities all over the country and in Europe particularly have been doing for years. And somehow it works for them. Now, I do not want to downgrade the comments that have been made by staff and others about the practicalities in this issue. I get it. I think that DOT has put us in a really bad situation. Nevertheless, I think that we haven't used all our creative juices to figure out how to make this work. And so my context for this is I just want to give you, because I just read this yesterday and I thought, oh, this is very appropriate. I just read an interview with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
You got to speak right into it. Yeah.
Okay. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, where he was interviewed about his experience as the mayor when he visited Copenhagen and other European cities, trying to figure out what they were doing that worked for them. And he had 3 interesting observations. One of them was that design really matters. And he said, this is sort of an obvious thing, but if you have the right design, it makes a difference and more people will bike. But the observation that he thought was more interesting was that we have this notion in this country that Nordic folks bike more because there's something in their blood. They just want to bike. And he said, actually, and this is a quote, if you take a picture of downtown Copenhagen in the 60s or 70s, it's as car-centric as any place in the United States. So what happened wasn't automatic or completely organic. They made a set of choices, and those choices helped. They made policy decisions and design decisions that led to a vastly increased use of bicycle and multimodal transportation. And his third observation was that there seemed to be sort of a tipping point, which he puts at sort of about 2% of the population being regular bikers, including particularly commuters. And he says when he gets to that point, something happens that dramatically increases the awareness of car drivers and results in more safety for pedestrians and also for drivers. And he said, when I think of policy, what I think about is what are the investments that we can make that increase that tipping point? Well, I would argue that this is an investment that you can make that will increase that tipping point, that this is the point that we're at right now, that you're at right now, that we at the village are at. Are we going to make the policy choices that lead to the kind of design that's going to increase dramatically the number of riders so that we get to the tipping point where we normalize bicycle riding and multimodal transportation? Vision 2025, multimodal transportation is one of the things that we're using as a selling point for the village of Shorewood. It's why my wife and I moved here after we retired 3 years ago, because there's so many options for pedestrians and for bicyclists. I understand that you're dealing with constraints, there's resource constraints, but I ask you to stretch yourselves and to think about whether there's more creative ways of approaching some of these issues that have been identified that I think are real issues about Lake Drive, but that gets us to the point where we make the kind of investments and the kind of policy decisions that result in truly Shorewood, where multimodal transportations become normalized and where we decenter a little bit our focus on cars. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Others, members of the public? Yes, please. Yeah, you have to talk right into the mic, your name and your
Right in there.
and your
It's
address.
a little awkward.
If you could spell your last name and your address,
Yeah,
please.
my name is Jeff Purvis, Purvis. I live at 401 Lake Drive. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity. Actually,
You have to talk right in.
oh, thank you. I have actually very appreciative because I've actually lived Lake Drive. I've been there 4 years. I've had 2 cars totaled on Lake Drive, and that's with the current parking at, 12 feet, and the lanes are 12 feet. One at 3:30 in the morning on a Saturday night, one at 8:30 in the morning from a, doesn't really matter. This is the worst idea I've seen. And I understand bike lanes, but think about it. People bike, in Wisconsin, 5 months a year. So we're going to change our structure for the entire 12 months for 5 months of biking. And the structure that I've seen is basically the west side is not going to be allowed for parking. So people that are there for yard work or deliveries, where are they going to park? The other side of the street, the east side, my side, and then basically try to move their equipment across the street? It's not going to work. So why would you go to the expense? And this is actually so much less than the expense of the original, which was basically to take out the all the trees last year. But why do this? I don't, I don't understand this. Why do this for 5 months bike traffic? I mean, I bike, my family bikes, my neighbor who lives next door to me, he bikes. Why are we doing this? It's a lot of money spent, and it really achieves nothing except like we have a bike lane. Well, you know what? If you drive to Whitefish Bay, they have bike lanes, right? People bike in those bike lanes. It doesn't really matter that if you take away the parking lanes, I'm frustrated.
Thank you.
because-
I hear you.
Can you hear my frustration?
I can.
This
So I'm going to ask you,
This is a waste of time.
we've heard, so I'm going to leave it as rhetorical because it's not a dialogue back and forth, but we've heard your comment. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Yes, sir. And I forgot to say, but we typically keep comments to, 2 minutes per speaker. So I'm sorry I didn't start that.
Brian Elliott, 4154 North Lake.
Excellent, thank you.
Just to make clear, so we've prioritized trees. We keep the trees, keep the roadway the same width, but to get state funding, the bike lanes have to be part of this. Am I understanding that correctly? So then my concern would be the discussion of a parking at curb or bike lane at curb. And I think the bike lane at curb would be a disaster for some of the functional problems we've talked about here earlier. But also from a safety standpoint, I've lived on Lake Drive for 11 years now. I back into my driveway whenever possible, because to pull out of my driveway most times of the day when I am pulling out of my driveway, rush hour in the morning or in the evening, it's really, really a continuous long line of traffic. And my concern is if we have these landscaping vehicles, bigger delivery vehicles parked away from the curb, and we have a reduced roadway of a 10-foot lane now, for me to navigate my vehicle out forward will be difficult enough, and it'll be a tight turn. But to do it backward will be almost impossible. And a lot of us he's got young drivers that are high school age kids or whatever. If we're gonna have to have this bike lane, if we had the bike lane obviously away from, at least you could get the vehicle out a little bit and see what's happening. And when there's a break in the action, you could go. But to try and do it with parking away would be dangerous. I strongly urge against that.
Thank you very much. Other members of the public? Let me check online. We have people on virtual. Do we see any hands?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Schmidt. I live 39 Drive, 2 houses south of the Capitol. A little bit about, I think a bike lane on a curb is a mistake. Then you're parking next to the rushing traffic of Lake Drive, and people are, how are they going to park there? Parallel park. You're going to block the only vehicular traffic that exists on Lake Drive. I mean, you want to see some accidents. Auto repair, keep people happy. The residents. You know, I sympathize with the bike riders. I love the outdoors. I bike ride myself. I don't bike ride on Lake Drive because gosh, you know, if you guys want to the bikers, put them over on Downer. That's a wide street. There's not very little traffic. You can put a wide bike lane. I don't think funnel them from Lincoln Memorial block, 2 blocks west to Downer and north. You know, Lake Drive, I mean, in all due respect, Lake Drive is actually a highway. Allow people out of do their job. And I think we have to respect that a little bit. I'd like to see Lake Drive become a little country lane, you know, in front of my house and, you know, quiet, you know, that's sure, I'd love that. Happen. Have to compromise a little bit.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands on the virtual meeting. And so Mr. Pendleton, if you would like to.
Thank you and good evening. Thank you for your service. First of all, Sandy Pendleton, 3529 North Frederick Avenue. First off, about the Atwater Park, Atwater Beach area, we have to understand there will be no bike lanes in that area. That will be a share row. There will not be a protected bike lane or a conventional bike lane under any of these proposals. So this whole, oh my gosh, we might have somebody dropping a towel in the protected bike lane at Atwater Park. That won't happen under any of these 4 designs. That's a misconception. Every study that's been done that I'm aware of regarding protected bike lanes indicate that safety is increased for all users of that street. Drivers and pedestrians and cyclists. So if somebody has a study to the contrary, please bring it to me. They have protected bike lanes that work in Minneapolis, Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, New York, and even Buffalo, New York. I hear they get some snow in Buffalo, New York, and yet they have built protected bike lanes. Some of these cities have very dynamic and chaotic street environments with aggressive drivers. New York City, Chicago, we've all experienced that. They can make it work there, and safety has increased on those streets once protective bike lanes have occurred. If they can do it those places, We can do it in Shorewood. It will create a slightly different culture. As to garbage trucks, leaf trucks, having to travel in the protected bike lane and that buffered lane, I don't care about that. It happens in New York City. It happens in Chicago. Cyclists are a legal vehicle. They can travel in the driving lane, just like other vehicle, just like bikers will have to when they're making a left-hand turn onto any street as they're headed north. So that should not be an impediment that prevents us doing this. Quickly on this, there is no standard. Okay. What we're talking about is in 2004, the Department of Transportation adopted something called the Wisconsin Bicycle Facility Guide. That sets out typical bike lane. There's no one standard bike lane. Always has to be designed for the particular street and situation. They have typicals in there. What is being protected bike lanes were not considered typical at that time. There weren't the studies back. So in short, I'll wrap up here.
Thank you.
I support option 4. We would like to see protected bike lanes on Lake Drive for all the reasons I've indicated. And if we can't vote in favor of that tonight, I think the sound thing to do is to delay. Wait to see if the DOT, what they come up for with the design for Milwaukee, and then we make the decision. So thank you very much for your consideration. Thank you for your service.
Mr. Pendleton, could you repeat your address? We didn't catch it.
I'm sorry, 3529 North Frederick Avenue, Shorewood.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Actually, sir, I typically don't allow this. I'm going to allow it this time since you're a first time user, but remember, okay? And 1 minute.
I live in years. The bike lanes there are an absolute failure. I know friends that have been hurt very badly in the bike lane in Chicago. If you live there, you know what I'm talking about. But I will say this, the people that I was out there in front of my house at 4162 North Lake Drive for 3 hours today, there was not one biker. So why would you take and make these bike lanes disrupt deliveries? So like, I think one of the things is deliveries on the west side, so they have to move to the east side. Why would you do that for 5 months of the year when 7 months of the year, nobody's biking? I said today,
Thank you.
no bikers.
Thank you. Okay. Sir, would you like to speak? Okay.
Bill Hunt, 3850 North Lake Drive. I'm not against the having some kind of new bike world and all that. But I mean, we got to keep in mind that the things that I've seen where bike lanes do where it goes out and then there's a curb. So the bike lane actually has its own like asphalt, and then you'd have the curb, then you have parking. But this can't work because we have residential. Now you get driveways every 50 feet or so. We have to keep in mind that we are on a highway. We are a residential area. We do have a beach. And when I see like people are going to be parking and they don't have their own physical barrier, the parking is going to be a mess. And you're going to find like the problems that you find with the one gentleman who talked about getting out of his driveway. I share his sentiments. Very difficult, especially if you're trying to get out of your driveway between like 3 and 5 in the afternoon. Good luck. You're probably just going to have to take a right-hand turn. Cause it just doesn't really work. And then at Atwater, you're going to have all kinds of. I guess and I'm not a big biker. I bike like a few times a year here, but I think that the bikers should more appreciate being on the outside because they can go faster, they can go by. They don't have to mess around with people that are going to be kind of going between there. And then like the garbage pickup and stuff, if there's cars there, I can't imagine what they're going to have to be going through. It doesn't fit. And unfortunately it doesn't, as much as we'd all like, it just doesn't, because it's a unique situation. If it would have been built differently 100 some years ago, where there wasn't the houses that were so close to the road and all that, you could do it, but you can't tear down people's homes. You just can't change it. It's unfortunate.
Thank you very much. All right. Anyone in Zoom who wants to speak? I still don't see any hands. Okay, I think we can close public comment at this time. Board of Trustees. There. Thank you. We did have pretty extensive conversation, and so those things have been mentioned, just so you know, it's been represented, so. Okay, so what is the will of the board? Is there a motion at this time? Yes, trustee Stokebrand?
I move that the village board endorse the 6-foot bike lane parking at the curb model.
Second.
All right, motion by trustee Stokebrand, seconded by trustee Ursink. Any discussion?
Just to clarify, you're looking at the one that does not have the buffered lane?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'm concerned about the width. I know our engineering person said that I believe that the minimum width for a parking lane, or I'm sorry, a traffic lane should be 11. When we go with the buffers, they both drop down to 10. And I think he also talked about the parking requirement was 9. And I think, let's see, this is, it's still only at 8. So we're still not up to standard size. I'm also concerned about the operating costs. And I also have a couple of issues with this. Again, it's the seasonality. You know, I lived there for almost 30 years. People just don't bicycle here. And I love the idea that everybody's going to get biking to work. Our parking and transportation study showed 5% of the people bicycle to work, or was it 3? There were more people that walked to work in Shorewood than bicycled. And I'd love to see that change, but you know, people just don't bicycle here when it gets below 50 degrees. And to do this for such, you know, I have to look at the balance and the trade-off. The other thing is, I'm really disappointed that, you know, we talk about the multimodal system and this goes nowhere. This connects us with nothing. I love the idea about, you know, putting some eggs in the basket on Downer. If we were really thinking creatively, it seems to me we'd have a bike barn at the Lakeshore Mobile, because most people you want to take, it's like the last mile to 2 miles that you can't get. So you could have a bike barn at the Lakeshore Mobile where they're no longer servicing vehicles, and they could take the bus that far and then get on their bike and bike home. You could reach into Whitefish Bay with that kind of a thing. Look at all the people we're going to have living on Oakland and Capitol with the reduced parking requirement. I'd love to see the state help us put up some bus shelters, because that would help with intermodal. That would be another way to get people living a healthier lifestyle, getting out of their cars, working for climate. And I just think for our environment, those would be better ideas to pursue. I also like the ideas that we had for bike boulevards on Kensington and Murray. So I think that those would be wiser investments for the money. Thank you.
Trustees?
I would just add a quick comment. I'd definitely be, and as I've expressed before, I'm always in favor of more buses. We could look at a bus going down Lake Drive as well as an option to increase modal transportation on Lake Drive as well. That might be a good option for helping people get to work. But I would still say that I'm in favor of the 10-foot driving lanes. I think we need to narrow the road, slow traffic. I just think people drive too fast on that street, and we need to encourage them to slow down. And that's one proven engineering method that can work to slow traffic.
Other discussion? I've closed public comment. I'm going to abstain because there's a lot of unknowns, and so I will be abstaining from this vote. And another reason, it's largely because I don't think this is the only kick at the can we have. One of the things I said at the last meeting is that this needs to be part of a comprehensive plan, a regional approach, collaboration, and it just isn't, there's too much. It's not that it can't be, it just isn't right now. It's just what Chair Brooks said.
But could I have a point of information? Do we not need to make a decision tonight? Then the state is willing to, how long do we have before the state says you have to make a decision? What's the drop dead date here?
My understanding, and Director of Public Works and DOT can advise differently if I do not have this correct, but they are intending to have a public information meeting at the end or the beginning of February. And so whatever is recommended tonight would then be reviewed and evaluated to put into design for that public informational meeting. And hearing that, they would need tonight to know what direction we were heading.
So a decision is needed tonight by WSDOT.
Yes, and WSDOT's also on the line. If that is not clear, or if I've mischaracterized that in any way, you can let us know.
Any other, I'm sorry, Mr. Pendleton.
I think they're muted. Which dot is muted?
Ms. Tarnow or Mr. Bub? Did anybody want to hear from DOT?
Well, yeah, I
Yeah,
guess I'm
okay.
confused by your comment because you made it sound like we don't need to decide and we have more time.
Yeah, I'm
And
not.
I was under the impression that we needed to decide tonight,
Mhm.
so it seems binary.
Mhm. I'm just going to abstain from the vote because there's not enough information and I think it's unreasonable what we're being asked to consider.
Deb Tarno from the DOT has raised her hand.
Ms. Tarnow?
Thank you. For clarification, what we are seeking input on is location of the bike lane. And then from there, we will consider we will get into detail design of how we will configure the roadway. But if we go if the board chooses to pursue the bike lane along the curb, then that requires us to go through an evaluation process that will require additional effort on our behalf, which is fine if that's what you'd like to do. The part of that is that at the end of the evaluation, we may make a determination within the department that we don't think that this corridor is an ideal location for that type of configuration. Or at the end of the evaluation, we may say that there's no reason to object to this, and then it'll come back to the community to weigh in some more. So while what we're really looking for at this point is how invested the community is in having the bike lane along the curb.
Ms. Tarnow, it's similar to the hours of extra work that our staff put in and our community members put in the last 2 weeks in response to your question, to the department's question. It would also not be out of scope to ask you to evaluate both whether or not we expressed the bike lane at the curb as our priority.
Correct.
It sounds like you're asking so that you know whether you need to do the evaluation or not.
Correct.
However, it seems reasonable since we did a pretty in-depth evaluation that it would not be unreasonable to ask the Department of Transportation to evaluate both. So regardless of the outcome tonight, it's possible for the department to evaluate a bike lane at the curb.
It's always possible.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what we're looking for is input at this point.
Well, we definitely have given you a lot of that.
Yes, you have.
And pages upon pages of input.
Are you currently doing the study for Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee? I mean, is that something you're already doing right now? Are they proceeding
The
with the bike lane to the curb?
excellent question. And the city of Milwaukee has begun the evaluation process. Their circumstance is a little bit different because they have a wider curb section. They have 46 feet to deal with, where the village of Shorewood has 44 feet from curb to curb. So the conditions are different for the city of Milwaukee. They are also proposing a different typical section that includes a protected bike lane with a physical barrier on the west side of the roadway. They are not proposing a barrier on the east side of the roadway. And so to answer your question, the city of Milwaukee's proposed typical it is in the final step of being approved. That the final step is BTO approval. And I
Now-
don't know where that's at.
Can I just
At
kind of,
city level.
can I follow that up? You know, as kind of the ambassadors of that whole corridor of Lake Drive, wouldn't you want to see some consistency? Or, you know, I mean, it doesn't sound like if we pull this option of you know, bike lane towards curb, it's not even going to be the same as Milwaukee, right? So it's going to be a different sort of aesthetic, a different thing. So, and then Whitefish Bay is going to be completely different. So you're going to have these different sections on Lake Drive all the way down. Is that the WISDOT can't want that, right? I mean, you kind of want that consistency for the whole corridor. Is that, or are you letting the community just decide what they want?
We're letting the communities decide, or letting the communities provide input on what they want.
But in the long run, you'll be making the final decision on that. So if we decided.
But we are not to answer your question in a better fashion, WISDOT is not looking at this from a corridor perspective throughout all 3 communities or 4 communities or however many communities Lake Drive extends. We're looking at it independently for each community.
Thank you.
Well, it's connecting highways. Part of the issue is it's connecting highway and not a state highway. There's a distinction, there's a difference in that regard.
Oh, thank you very much for that. All right, trustees, any further discussion or call the question? We have a motion on the floor, which is,
I think all we need to say is parking on the curb. I don't think they need, they're just asking
Correct.
parking on the curb versus bike lane on the curb. They're not asking for option 1, 2, or 3, parking or bike lane on curb. And I think
that would be a way to simplify,
Right
although
now-
the motion on the floor is specific.
I would like to, you know, I would withdraw my
Okay.
second, so I can just, you know, I would like to withdraw my second then and just
Okay.
be a little bit more simple.
Okay, motion is withdrawn. So that,
And I guess there's,
So
the
if
question
some-
is there another second?
right, is there another second for trustee Stokbrand's motion? Is that the procedure?
Well,
Attorney
there's
Deneen?
no second, has to be a second.
If the second withdraws, can we look for another second for that motion, or do we have to start over?
Good.
Okay,
A motion
so
is possible.
yes.
Second,
Mhm.
at least
Okay.
right now.
Would you like us to repeat the motion? Clerk Carroll? Yeah. No, they're deep in. All right. Would you repeat?
Sure.
Yes.
I move that the village of Shorewood pursue the 6-foot bike lane with parking at the curb for the Lake Drive 2025 reconstruction.
6-foot bike lane at curb,
Parking. at
parking
curb.
lane.
6-foot bike lane parking at the curb.
Oh, got it. And is that one of the alternatives as stated? Number 3, you said? Number 1. Okay. All right, is there a second for that motion at this time? Motion fails for lack of second. Is there another motion? Nope.
No, this is just
Would you like a
unbelievably
second?
frustrating. So go ahead with your motion.
I'd like to, my motion would be, I'd like to move to recommend parking at the curb.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee Arndorfer. Discussion. Trustee Stokebrand.
It would seem that we've already talked about this a lot, and at this point, our own staff would probably like to move forward with an idea of what we have going forward. And as someone on the budget committee, if we're going to be looking at a $30,000 added expense for striping, for buffering, it seems like that decision could be made tonight.
Trustee Kudo.
Well, I don't disagree with you. The decision could be made tonight. I think this provides us with as many options as humanly possible moving forward. I mean, they're asking for, you know, we're getting asked a question. We can either answer that question specifically, or we can answer that question and then add on a bunch of stuff. I'm interested to see where Milwaukee ends up, even if WIS DOT doesn't care about the continuity of the corridor. I think it's stupid to know as the village of Shorewood connecting Whitefish Bay and Milwaukee. You know, what I don't want to see are you know, protected bike lanes here, not protected bike lanes there, bicyclists having to jog back and forth on different sides of the street. Like, I mean, I understand that they're letting local governments have some control, and I appreciate that, but it seems to trustee Ursink's point earlier, it just seems ridiculous not having. And so I'm going to support parking at the curb, and then we can see where it goes from there. But you know, this whole process, based on the last meeting, I was under the impression that we had to make a decision. That's what you said. It's what DOT said. And then we get to today and we don't have to make a decision. And then, you know, so I'm kind of done with this for tonight. And, you know, I'll be voting for parking at the curb, and we can parcel this out however we need to down the road.
Any other? Trustee Moore? Baldoff? Okay. Well, with that, let's take a roll call vote. Oops.
Trustee Kudo,
I'm still a yes.
trustee Lynn,
Nay.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
President McKay. You still abstaining?
Abstain.
Trustee Moore Baldoff,
Yes.
trustee Ursink,
Yes.
trustee Stokebrand.
Aye.
Motion carried 5-2 with one abstaining vote.
Thank you very
Wait.
much.
5-2.
That math.
I think it's 5-1 with.
5-1 with one abstaining, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Moving on to our second item, 4B. I will sleep.
Thank you to the residents for coming
Yeah,
in.
thank you very much.
And for speaking so closely into the mic for those first-time participants.
Yeah. Can somebody read the item? My computer decided to.
It is to consider the Kapoor proposal for the State Highway 32 real estate services, an exception to the purchasing policy. Recently brought to our attention with a change of a project manager for our Lake Drive project. We were previously informed that WISDOT would be doing this service for us under the scope of their contract with Kapoor, and originally had that agreement with WISDOT. We have recently come to find out that that is not an approved method for purposes of funding. And so they need to parse out that work with Kapoor and have that let by the village of Shorewood. However, when let and accomplished in accordance with the federal and state regulations, is 100% reimbursable through WISDOT. So at this time, I'm asking for the board's consideration to approve an agreement with Kapoor and waive the purchasing requirements that would otherwise require an RFP for this work, so that we may move forward with this unanticipated proposal.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion.
Thank you.
I move approval of temporary suspension of the purchasing policy and approve the scope of work for Kapoor, Inc. and subcontractor single source in the total amount of $75,740.
Second.
Any discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Or I would like to do a roll call vote.
Trustee Arndorfer.
Aye.
Trustee Lynn.
Aye.
President McKay.
Aye.
Trustee Kudo.
Aye.
Trustee Ursink.
Aye.
Trustee Moore Baldoff.
Aye.
Trustee Stokebrand.
Aye.
Ayes have it, 7-0. Motion carried. Sorry, 7-0.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Trustee Kudo?
Sorry.
Okay.
I'd like to remove item H.
Well, wait, let's get a thing. So is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved. And then a second?
Second.
All right. Motion to approve by trustee Ursink, seconded by trustee Moore Baldoff. Discussion, trustee Kudo.
I'd still like to remove item H.
Removal of 5H.
Yes,
Anyone else? Okay. Motion to approve consent agenda with the exception of 5H. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Moving on to item 6, items removed from the consent agenda. Item 5H, consider appointments to Board of Appeals. Trustee Kudo.
So I'm just looking for a little bit of background on these two appointments. I know I looked back through and I didn't see them on JP&L at any point. And so I'm just looking for a little bit of information on what committee they came through or.
My understanding is that we did not have sufficient applicants before during the regular process or on file for review. And so in concert with a practice that we've used for filling vacancies, Assistant Village Manager Anderson and Clerk Harrell coordinated with the chair of that committee to review 2 new applications that we recently received in the last month or so. Because we currently did not have any others on file for review and reviewed them and brought them forth.
So my understanding based on policy number 30 is that these appointments need to go before JP&L before coming before the board. Are we deviating from that policy because there were only 2 applications?
I apologize because I don't have that in front of me.
The policy?
Correct. If
So-
it does say that and it
It's
did
in
go
the
through
memo.
that,
In the memo.
okay.
So, I mean, I don't have a problem with these 2 applicants.
No,
This is a policy question or a process question. I just want to make sure that if folks are supposed to go through a committee or they,
with some of the committees, I'll defer to however you want to handle it. With some of the committees most recently, because we've had some standing vacancies. I know that Chris has been reaching out and communicating with both the chair and then the trustee liaison for those committees. We can definitely
you.
send it to JP&L.
Bless you.
I think he sneezed.
Mhm.
He just sneezed. I think I just said, bless you. Sorry, I
Oh.
didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we stick to procedure. And that, that these applicants go through the proper channels, through the proper committee and that are presented to the board. And it's, again, I don't have a problem with either of these candidates. They both look wonderful. Otherwise, we have a situation where staff and potentially one liaison are picking members of committees as to elected. How the setup. And I don't think there was anything nefarious or ever. It's easier to do the way that it was done.
Sure.
It's just against.
Is there a motion to direct this item back to JP&L?
I would make a motion to direct this item not back, but to JPN for consideration.
Second that.
Okay, motion by trustee Kudo, seconded by trustee Stokebrand. Any discussion?
Just one quick question. I'm assuming this would go back to the first December meeting. If JP&L meets before the board and approves these, is that enough time to send them to that
We
regular
can-
board meeting, or would it have to go then another 2 weeks to the next board meeting?
Typically, we wait for the next 2 weeks, but if it's the pleasure of the group to list it on the same item or the same agenda.
I have
Happy to
no
do
problem
that.
with
I'd be okay with that, given that it came to our agenda this time. You know, we've had the time to review it. It's been publicly available. I'd be okay doing it on the same night.
that. Yeah, I read the applications. There's,
Yeah.
again, I would vote yes for both. We just need to follow our.
And these were the only two applications for Board of Appeals right now, currently on file.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries 7-0. Public hearings, we have one tonight. 7A, 2023 proposed budget. We'll have a presentation by Director Emmanuelson, followed by any board discussion. Then I'll open the public hearing and then close it, and then we will move on to new business. And while Director Emmanuelson is getting set up, I will like to acknowledge his 5 years of service, more than 5 years. Not, oh God.
Time flies.
I would like to acknowledge his 9 years of service to the village. As everyone knows, he's accepted a position that will decrease his commute time considerably. This is also for a larger organization. I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with you. I've learned a lot and you've brought us forward and you will be sorely missed.
Thank you very much. Rebecca, do you have the slides for the
Yes.
public hearing? For board members, none of this should come as a surprise, but for the public record, we do like to have a brief overview of the budget before we take public comment and other considerations for the 2023 budget. The budget overview really talks about the property tax breakdown. As we all know, we're heavily reliant on property taxes for funding operations within the village. Property taxes also come from the multiple jurisdictions within the community, the school district, MATC, MMSD. So the village's portion of the total property tax bill is about 26%. So when we get the tax bills, you know, our portion is about 1/4 of the total tax bill. On the next slide, we have the budget tax levy trends for the last 10 years. Over the last 10 years, tax levies increased on average 1.58%. Again, that's a very slow and steady growth over that time frame. Even though this year's budget is proposed to increase by over 4%, I think the long-term trends for the village speak for themselves. Again, the next slide is again back to that tax levy. 83% of the village's tax levy is for operations and about 16.8% is for debt service. And that debt service pays for all the various improvements that have happened in the community over the last 10, 15 years. Again, the overall tax levy in the proposed budget is presented at 4.04% increase, which is actually going to be about $4 less per household this year, even at that level, because TID 1 closed and broadened the tax base by more than 4.04%.
Revenue highlights. Okay, 69% property taxes again. So we're extremely reliant on property taxes to cover any cost increases. State shared revenue is essentially flat. Most of our other revenues within the general fund are essentially flat. So any increase in operating costs tends to be overly reliant on property tax revenues to cover. Expenditure highlights. We look at expenditures quite often in a department level and then line item detail. This is a look at our expenditures by service areas. We start talking about general government, public works, police, other public safety like the North Shore Fire Department, and then the ubiquitous other. You can see that public works is about 25%, 23% of the budget, public police rather, 33%, other public safety, 28%, general government, 13%, just to give a sense for where those valuable tax dollars are applied within the organization and serving the public. Some general notes on the left-hand column about where the increases for 2023 were focused. About $154,000 in staff costs, another $100,000 other intergovernmental payments for North Shore Fire Department and dispatch services, and $122,000 for contractual payments for items like waste disposal, electrician services, and crossing guards. Another perspective we like to present in the public hearing is to put the budget in the context of a monthly bill per se. So the monthly bill for municipal services would be about $202.50 across all the various functional areas within the community and within the operations. Then we have subsequent breakdowns for how much of the tax bill on a monthly basis would be applied to those various other service areas. Again, I think that just adds context, because when you get your property tax bill at the end of the year, it's one large bill for the entire year for multiple jurisdictions. And again, we hope that we're providing services at a cost that we consider to be a reasonable value for the community. Special revenue funds. The library fund is effectively unchanged this year. It's funded 88% by property tax revenues. Senior Resource Center fund had a very small increase this year. It's funded 55% from property tax revenues, and another significant portion of that funding is from the William Benjamin Fund to support programming activities within that division. Shorewood Today Fund is literally unchanged. 75% of those costs are funded through advertising fees. With the debt service fund, expenditures of $3.6 million in 2023. About $1.3 million of those expenditures are related to TID activities for prior incentives, improvements, and other items within those TID districts. The property tax levy for debt service is a little over $2 million, which is a 5% increase from 2022. And that is a scheduled increase, as we are also supplementing with general fund reserves to meet our total debt service tax levy payments, to get through a period where we had a sharp increase in debt service tax levy back in 2018. So instead of making that large jump, we've kind of taken a slow and moderate increase over a number of years to help manage the impact of that on our residents.
As with every year, the village commits significant resources to capital improvements within the community, also within our equipment and facilities. This lists those significant projects of over $25,000. In addition, we do have some carryover projects. We're waiting for deliveries. That is not new tax dollars, but it is in the budget to be expended in 2023 using reserves from previous allocations. The enterprise funds are the village's parking utility, water utility, and sewer utility. They are designed by nature to function fiscally independent of property taxes. Really of particular note this year is that for 2023, the village submitted a request to increase rates to cover some of the costs of the infrastructure improvements that are happening over the last 2 years and are planned for next year. That result was an anticipated increase of about 20% overall. I can update you briefly that the PSC did make the recommendation, and the aggregate increase is going to be about 15% is what they've approved. Related to the water and sewer utilities, it should also be noted that about 1/3 of the total cost of each of those utilities goes for either purchased water from Milwaukee Water Works or purchased sewer treatment from Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District. So that's again, a large portion of the costs that are to some degree outside of our control and significant to those operations. And finally, again, this is a group effort, department heads, staff, and the board. We've gone through a lot of review and discussion on the 2023 budget. So I hope that we're at a pretty good place to move forward, and look forward to your comments.
Director Manuelson, I want to thank you for your service and the very extreme solid framework that you've brought our community to over the last several years, and has positioned it very bright for the future. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Other comments and questions at this time? Trustee Ursink.
Mark, I want to say thank you for your service. I understand the circumstances, and I'm happy that you will not have to commute to Shorewood every day. But you will be missed greatly. I think out of everybody that's kind of left this village, yours, for whatever reason, really, is I think you will be missed you'll be missed. And we really appreciate everything that you've done for this community, and your shoes will be hard to replace, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Are you sure we're funnier? No,
You are fun. You are fun.
You sure you want to do this?
I just asked him the same thing today.
You figured out Zoom, right? I mean, you can work from home, right? I
You
mean,
have to come here. I don't care what you do. Just fine.
They've got controversy too, that pedestrian mall.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Are there any questions related to the budget? Okay. Well, then at this time, yes.
Public.
I just want to say I'll vote for the budget. It's been a pleasure working with you, Mark. I think that it should be noted, without the TID closing, we wouldn't be in this situation. The 4.04% increase is actually larger. I asked Mark, when was the last time we had a tax levy increase that big? And he went back to, I think, 2009, and it was 3.9%. So closing the TID has made a big difference for us here this year. And it's just something to think about going forward.
Thank you. All right. Well, if possible, can we switch the screen back to the Zoom room? And then at that time, we can open the public hearing. All right, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing at 9:05. Anyone that has comments related to the budget can speak at this time. You can raise your hand and then state your name and address. All right, I am not seeing anyone. I have a thing about public hearings, at least leaving them open a minute.
For the record, there is no one attending.
Yes, for the record, there is no one attending in person. Must be a really good budget. All right, seeing no comments or no requests to comment, I will close the hearing at 9:06. And with that, we can close this item. Moving on to citizens to be heard. This item is for matters not on the agenda. There are no citizens in person. Are there any citizens to be heard on the Zoom? All right, seeing none, we can move on to new business. We have 5 resolutions related to the budget. They need to be taken separately. 9A, consider resolution 2022-17, a resolution adopting the 2023 budget and authorizing the 2022 general property tax levy against all taxable property in the village of Shorewood. Trustee Stokbrand.
I move to approve resolution number 2022-17, a resolution adopting the 2023 budget and authorizing the 2022 general property tax levy against all taxable property in the village of Shorewood.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, this will be a roll call vote.
Trustee Ursink,
Yes.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee Moore Baldoff,
Yes.
trustee Kudo,
Aye.
trustee Land,
Aye.
President McKay.
Yes,
Motion carried 7-0.
thank you.
Trustee Stokbrand.
Aye.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
All right. Motion carries 7-0. 9B, resolution 2022-18 to carry forward of allowable prior year unused levy capacity. Is there a motion to approve? Trustee Stokbrand.
I move we approve resolution 2022-18, a resolution authorizing the carry forward of allowable prior year unused levy capacity.
Second.
Motion by trustee Stokbrand, seconded by trustee Moore Baldoff. Any discussion? Hearing none, this will be a roll call vote.
Trustee Stokbrand,
Aye.
President McKay,
Yes.
trustee Kudo.
Aye.
Trustee Moore Baldoff,
Yes.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee Ursink,
Yes.
trustee Land.
Aye.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you. Item 9C, resolution 2022-19, delinquent municipal charges. Is there a motion to approve? Trustee Stokbrand.
I move we approve resolution 2022-19, a resolution authorizing a special assessment to be levied for delinquent municipal charges.
I'll second.
Motion by trustee Stokbrand, seconded by trustee Moore Baldoff. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, this will be a roll call vote.
Trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee Kudo,
Aye.
trustee Stokbrand,
Aye.
trustee Land,
Aye.
trustee Moore Baldoff,
Yes.
President McKay,
Aye.
trustee Ursink.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you. Item 9D, right? Resolution 2022-20, special assessments for private laterals. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion. I move to approve resolution 2022-20, a resolution authorizing a special assessment for the cost of replacement of private lead service laterals to be levied against each lot affected for the year 2022.
Second.
All right. Motion by trustee Moore Baldoff, seconded by trustee Lynn. Any discussion? Trustee Stokbrand.
I just wanted to clarify, we do think we're getting a lot of grants for these things, but we have to make sure that we have legally allowed ourselves to do a tax levy for this yet. That's what this is about.
Yeah, correct. We would not have. Yeah,
Okay, actually, okay, thank you.
and while the grants are not, they are not guaranteed because it's federal funding. And that can change. We still need to approve our borrowing capacity because we have the project in the southeast happening. Director Evangelist.
Yes, just for your information, these levies are for historical lateral replacements prior to this year. And those people had signed paperwork and agreement to have that work done voluntarily. And this is just, it was a 5-year wind off period. So we're just processing through that 1 year at a time for those.
Thank you.
So would they still be eligible for some grants?
No, that work's been done already. It was done several years ago.
Okay.
So any other discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
President McCaig,
Aye.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee Kudo.
Aye.
Trustee Lynn,
Aye.
trustee Moore Baldoff,
Aye.
trustee Stokbrand,
Aye.
trustee Ursink.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. 9E, Resolution 2022-21, Bid Operating Plan and Assessments.
Just a quick clarification in the packet itself. This resolution is listed as 2022-20 as well. So
Thank you.
Well, I made the correction to the resolution.
thank you.
Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion. I move to approve resolution number 2022-21, a resolution approving the Shorewood Business Improvement District 2023 operating plan and the 2022 special assessment levy.
Second.
All right, motion by trustee Moore Baldoff, seconded by trustee Ursink. Any discussion? Hearing none, although I will just say I like the lights on the poles, the light poles, not related to the item. This will be a roll call vote.
Trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee Stokbrand,
Aye.
trustee Kudo.
Aye.
President McCaig,
Yes.
trustee Moore Baldoff,
Yes.
trustee Lynn,
Aye.
trustee Ursink.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. That concludes our new business. Moving on to item 10, reports to village officials. 10A, village president. It says update on ICC meeting. I don't have an update.
Oh.
Sorry, I don't have any reports tonight. Item 10B, village trustees. Trustee Stokbrand.
I just want to thank Clerk Harrell and every election worker who put in the time on November 7th. It was a long day. And I just want to thank you.
Second.
Yes, agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I do have an update as well.
Yes.
So I was had the pleasure of being invited to and attending what's called a decades dinner at Buttermint. It was organized by Shorewood Connects and the Senior Resource Center and hosted and paid for by AARP. I was invited by Vashti Lozier, and she also facilitated the conversation for the evening. The purpose of the dinner was to bring together one member of the community from each decade. So somebody from their 20s up through their 90s. I learned that it's something that AARP hosts like these around the country. They chose Shorewood this year because I didn't know this either, but we were actually the first officially recognized community in the state to be age friendly. And it ended up being just a really wonderful event. It was really inspiring. The people who attended at least everybody from the boomer generation up were absolutely incredible. There was a resident who was born in Singapore and has found success as an artist in retirement, representing the 60s. The 70s were represented by a woman who was born in Cameroon and traveled the world working for the UN before settling in Shorewood for retirement. Representing the 80s was a man who was born in Baghdad and became a successful engineer in Wisconsin and found success in retirement as an athlete. And representing the 90s group was a resident who I was previously friends with as well, but who I did not know originally came to America from Latvia as a refugee of World War II. And you don't see a lot of World War II refugees these days. So it was a very inspiring group, a wonderful event. Shorewood Connects is working on setting up more of these types of things and events that are more open to other people. AARP was very strict, only one person per decade. And so hopefully there will be more events like this that connect residents of different ages. It was just a really wonderful and inspiring event. So I just wanted to share it here.
Thank you. Trustee Ursink.
Yeah, just an update for, our zoning, the zoning group held the public meeting I think it was last week, and it was very well attended up here. I know Bart and our consultant were really busy answering questions and explaining the code to residents. And I think it was a fairly sort of active night for those two. I think over the course of 3 hours, there were some people that I think stayed for the 3 hours and just like, it was a very social event. A lot of people were talking to each other. And looking at the boards is just a really great presentation, and I'm happy that we were able to accomplish that. Also, as you mentioned, the lighting, we finally have figured out as being part of the bid for the past, I don't know, six some odd years. Holiday decorations has always been on the top of our conversation, and to finally see something happen is a treat. To get rid of the snowflakes and go for the wrapping of the poles. It's been fantastic. And I can't give enough credit to Janet, our executive director. She has done a fantastic job. A note about Janet, she also took now a part-time position with the Downer, the Downer bid as well. So she's going to be a bid director for both Downer and Shorewood. And that's all I got.
Other trustee reports? All right, village manager.
Great. 2 items under my report tonight. In your packet is a Q3 work plan. I'm happy to pull it up and scroll through it. You guys want me to, I just need to know whether to share my screen or not. But we provided a similar format as we did for the prior update in Q2. You'll notice different projects that have moved between yellow, green, and red. We have a number that are just kicking off and in progress at this point in time. And then we have really the last 2 months, a lot of our focus for our standing committee time has been focused on budget or other items such as the DOT's requests that came forward that necessarily weren't planned. So we're looking forward to getting back to some of those items so we can check them off the list and make some progress and some forward direction. Following that, we just wanted to announce that the village and school board candidacy gathering is going to happen on December 5th at 5 p.m. This is something, and this is, I think, the first time Toya, oh no, I think you were here for the first one last year. But after this one, I'm going to pass the torch to her for organization in 2023. But it's really just a very simple but lovely opportunity for members of our board and the members of the school board to gather down in the village center. And candidates or people who are interested in running, know they're going to run, maybe they just want to know more about it, have an opportunity to just come in a very informal setting and just hear from those sitting officials and allow others to ask questions. So it's very informal. It will take about 45 minutes because we plan on being back here in time for standing committee meetings. It's just prior to your next regularly scheduled meeting. And that is also my humble plea to have some of you in attendance. So if you have an opportunity to spare that time, if you could just reach out to me and let me know that you're coming, because I'd love to come with some representatives from our board. Typically in the past, we've had 2, maybe 3. It's really just been schedule dependent. So if you can join us, please let me know.
I'll be there.
Now, is it awkward for a trustee that's up for reelection to be there as well?
No, that's actually happened both every year.
Every year. Gotcha.
Yeah, on both school board and village board.
I'll plan to be there as well.
Thank
I'm
you.
pumped We got two of you right off the bat.
Oh,
Thank
yes,
you.
I'll be there. I'll be there. We can order Jimmy John's in between if people didn't get dinner. Item 11, future items of consideration. Yes.
I don't recall if we did this during budgeting, we talked about that we wanted to have the finance director look into the credit card fees. And I don't know if we ever we have the transition going on now, but I thought rather than let it fall through the cracks, should I just be in touch with you if that's already been?
It has not been done to my knowledge by Mark. I don't see that occurring at this time or through transition. I know that he is not going to have an opportunity before he leaves
Right.
unless
So
he
should
identifies.
I'd like to make sure that it gets out there. Should I just wait until the transition has been made for personnel?
I apologize because I can't see the list. Is it on the list? On the future?
No, I think that's what it was. an
Oh,
oversight.
okay,
We
that's why
didn't-
it's coming up. Okay.
I'll wait.
Yeah, I just,
Okay.
we're gonna go through a new transition, so I can't forecast that one at this point. But
But
I
I
think it, I'm happy to make a note of it as well,
I'll
but
make a
it's,
note, you make a note and.
yeah.
Or if you want to make a motion this evening, it can always just go on the list and then you're not burdened with trying to remember, which
would be
I
good.
struggle with
That would
myself.
be good.
Okay.
So I make a motion that for future consideration, we get staff information about charging back credit card fees in all categories for budget purposes in planning for the 2024 budget.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by trustee Stokebrand, seconded by trustee Moore Baldoff. Any discussion? Again, this would occur after transition has been made with a new director. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. And if there are no other future items, motion to adjourn would be welcome at this time.
So moved. Second.
So trustee Ursink, motion by who? Oh, motion by trustee Stokebrand, seconded by trustee Ursink. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are now adjourned at 9:23 PM. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.